Hi, I'm Chris Cooper. Welcome to the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to give you some ideas about things you should be planting this fall. And Mr. D is here with advice on growing grapes. All of that and more is just ahead on the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South, so stay with us.
This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Goodwin's Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to the Family Plot. I'm Chris Cooper. Joining me today is Rick Putwell. Rick is the Director of Horticulture at the Memphis Botanic Garden, and Mr. D is here today.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining me. All right, Rick, let's talk about woody and herbaceous plants.
All right.
What do we need to know to get started?
Well, fall is really a good time to plant a lot of things.
Okay.
And most woody and herbaceous plants that are hardy in our zone, you know, questionable things, probably not the time to plant them, but things that we know are going to grow here, there's a lot of advantages to planting in the fall. Number one, usually the soil works up a lot better in the fall than it does in the spring. And number two, plants in the fall are not putting on any appreciable top growth, but they're growing roots. And our soil temperature generally is 40 or above, which means the roots are growing. So the plants you plant in the fall are going to be much better established when hot, dry weather comes the following spring and grow more.
Okay. And that just makes sense.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
It's growing with nature. You know, I think one of the things that's happened in the nursery industry in the United States is that we're kind of a convenient society, so everything's in a container, so you can have it anytime you want it, and that's fine, but it doesn't, if you grow with the seasons, the plants are going to do better than if you just plant them because you feel like it. Right. You know.
Yeah, it just makes sense. Now, let me ask you this. What zone are we in? Because people ask that question all the time. So.
It varies.
It's a very,
you know, I think we're still zone 7. I think we sometimes, I mean, we've had zone 8 weather for how many winters now? Although last winter was a little colder than some, but
this summer was a little colder.
It was. It was on the average. But you know, I would say most of the time we're zone 7, maybe zone 8. You know, it just depends on where you are. And I mean, just within the city, I think there's little microclimates where it's slightly warmer or cooler, and certainly in the rural areas we're cooler.
So the shorter days are going to help us out, though.
Well, yeah, the plants are slowing down with the top growth. The weather's cooler. And then something else about this convenience thing. You know, how many times do you plant something in the spring, you go to the garden center and it's in full bloom, and you get it in the ground and it's kind of done blooming because it came from a nursery somewhere else where it was forced. And, you know, if you plant that plant in the fall, it's going to bloom at the appropriate time in the spring. And that's worth a lot. And it's more comfortable to be outside then, you know.
Sure, it just feels better. Yeah, it just does.
Yeah.
Now, what about moisture? Now, we seem to get maybe pretty good rainfall.
We do. I mean, you have to monitor it. You know, in fall's a long season. You know, I'm thinking September till probably after Thanksgiving. And really, bigger trees you don't want to plant till they're dormant anyway, till we've had a hard freeze and the leaves have dropped. Okay. But anything you get in a container, you can plant it now. But, of course, it's still warmer and drier, so you're going to have to pay attention to the watering. But you're going to have that advantage of all that fall weather and winter for that to root in until spring. So that's, to me, it's worth the effort. So if you have a lot of planting to do, get started on container stuff and then wait till Thanksgiving or so to plant your bigger trees and things.
Okay, it just makes sense. Now, let me ask you about container plants.
Right.
Get this question all the time. So we get them out the container. Do we need to score those roots? Do you pull them apart?
Well, yes.
What do you recommend?
Okay, it depends on the plant. And if the plant's been in the container a long time, particularly a woody plant, a tree or a shrub, you know, you get those roots that kind of have a memory and grow in a spiral. And that's, you know what a girdling root is, where it grows around the trunk of the tree and kind of strangles it. So you kind of look at the root system, and if you see any of those girdling roots, I'd certainly cut a section out of that root so it hopefully will branch. If the root ball is really tight, you almost can't see any soil, then score it, and even the bottom a little bit. I mean, don't make spaghetti out of it. You don't want to kill the plant, but definitely score it, because wherever you cut it, it's going to branch and make new roots.
Okay.
If you take it out of the pot and it looks like the roots are just kind of nice, just getting to the edge, just rough them up a little with your hands and get it in there. The most important thing on woody plants, and to a lesser degree on herbaceous stuff, is plant it at the same depth or slightly higher than it was planted. I think more trees die from being planted too deep than any other reason.
Agreed. Now, how about preparing the soil?
Okay, that's real important. You know, generally speaking, most people have clay soil. If you live in an older neighborhood where people have gardened for a long time, you generally have better soil than a new house where everything has been scraped off and so forth. I'm a big advocate of incorporating as much organic matter as you possibly can. Okay. If you don't have a compost pile, buy some soil conditioner or leaf mold or cotton burr compost, whatever you can get your hands on, and work it in as deeply as you can. Remember that if you just dig a hole and improve it, that clay around it kind of acts like a pan to hold that in. So it's better to improve a big area than just individual holes. If you're planting a tree in the lawn, though, just dig the hole 3 or 4 times wider than the ball, so you've improved a larger area, and then plant that tree slightly high, and you should be fine.
There you have it. I see Mr. D though, they're shaking his hand. Yeah.
Just common sense.
Pretty good information.
Wide, not deep.
Correct. Correct.
Deep. All right. Well, look, while we have a little time, let's talk about our plants that we have on display here. And wherever you want to start is fine. Well,
we can start on the left.
Okay.
That is a cultivar of the southern magnolia, Magnolia grandiflora, called Little Gem, and that's a favorite of mine because it only gets on the average 15, 20 feet tall.
Okay.
And you know, in our urban landscape, it's really hard to fit a southern magnolia into the landscape. It's a tree everybody loves, but it gets so large, you know, probably can be 90, 100 feet wide, you know, where this is only going to be probably not more than 6 or 7 feet wide. And so you could actually plant that fairly close to a building like you would a crepe myrtle or something. You know, it'll adapt to that type of situation. So that's a cool plant.
Yeah, nice.
This is one with the lavender flower is Vitex, Agnus castus, and that one's called Mississippi Blues, so it's kind of named for our part of the world. That's a summer blooming shrub, or you could call it a small tree, actually, kind of the size of a dogwood. It's one of those plants that blooms on new wood, so if you cut it back severely in the spring, which I don't recommend, but if you need to for whatever reason, it'll still flower the same year. There's a lot of mythology about it called chaste tree in the days of old and so forth. The one with the pink flower is Chelone, and that's called Turtlehead, and that's a plant that likes moist areas. So if you've got and kind of like shade too. So if you have a spot in your garden where water runs along a little ditch on the edge of a woods, or maybe where the downspout comes down on the shady side of the house where you've got ferns and azaleas and stuff, that's kind of a nice summer to fall blooming perennial, and it likes that moist soil, so don't plant it in a hot, dry location.
Now, make sure we're missing the plant sale. We definitely want people to know about that.
Oh,
because you'll be able to find all of these plants at the sale, right?
Everything you see here came from our nursery area around our greenhouse at the garden. And our sale is the 27th and 28th of September, 9 to 5 both days. And we call it, you see the garden show. We have landscape companies that set up nice displays so you can kind of see like a vignette like you would at a home and garden show of a garden with fountains, all the whole bit. And then we have a marketplace where a lot of the nurseries will have plants for sale and other related garden items, and of course we'll have our own plants too. And the Iris Society will have some iris for sale.
Wow, so it should be a good event.
It will be.
Okay, we're hoping for good weather too, right?
Yeah.
All right, well thanks Rick, appreciate that information. There are a number of gardening events going on in the next couple of weeks. Here are just a few that might interest you. All right, Mr. D, we had Rick talking about the plant sale. Now you're going to tell us about grapes.
Talk about grapes.
Yeah, let's talk about growing grapes.
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing, you need the soil to be in good shape for grapes. And grapes, unlike blueberries, like a high pH, pH between 6.5 and 7. So make soil test where you're going to plant your grapes and make sure that you've got the soil in good shape. You also need to have a pretty good large area for grapes because in a commercial setting, they recommend planting grapes 20 feet apart in 12-foot rows. So, you know, grapes grow a lot. Bunch grapes, the muscadine types are common. There's some varieties that are of both of those types that are suited to our area. There's a couple of muscadine types, rabbit eye types and high bush types that also will work in this area. The rabbit eye types are more popular and seem to do better. I have a list of varieties. I can go down through some of the varieties that the University of Tennessee recommends.
Okay.
And
now, while you're looking at that, there are a lot of grapes being grown in this area that you're familiar with?
Quite a few, quite a few. We have a lot of, especially muscadine types seem to be more popular. And we actually have a couple of vineyards in the area, a winery or two around, and you may want to check them out. They're always welcome. You know, they welcome you there and allow you to do a little tasting. And, what Old Millington Road Winery, I think, is one of the newer ones.
Right,
in our area.
I say
new, that's been around 10, 15 years now. But American bunch grapes are the varieties that are on the UT website are Delaware, Fredonia, Morehead, Alwood, Concord, Catawba, and Niagara. Now, these are American bunch type grapes that exhibit some resistance to Pierce's disease. Pierce's disease is a disease that is, in the past, has been the most limiting factor as far as being able to effectively grow bunch grapes in our area. And it's a disease that's spread by leafhoppers. It's a rickettsia type organism that severely limits the life of bunch grapes. But these varieties that I mentioned are have some resistance to Pierce's disease. Muscadines are, like I said, they're native to this area. We have wild muscadines out there. The first varieties that were the first named variety is Scuppernong, and a lot of folks think that all muscadines are Scuppernongs. Okay. And they call muscadine Scuppernong. But Scuppernong is a female variety, the first named variety that was discovered in North Carolina along the Scuppernong River, and it was named about 1810. And it is a female variety that is bronze and is very tasty. It's a very, very good variety of muscadine. Muscadines are either female, and if they're female, and the Scuppernong is an example of a female variety, it requires a perfect flowered muscadine to cross-pollinate it. Wow. There are also perfect flowered varieties out there that pollinate themselves. So some of the female varieties, in my opinion, are the best varieties. So you probably need to have at least room for 2 or 3 muscadines if you're going to go that route. But some of the muscadine varieties that do well, let me flip through here, in Tennessee on our recommended list.
And while you look for that, Rick, I know once upon a time at the Botanic Garden, there were some grapes there.
We had some muscadines in the orchard, and which has kind of changed now. It's a different thing. And the thing that amazed me the most, now Bill Culvert, who I know has been on here, he always said that muscadines are pruned much later in the spring than the bunch grapes. Is that true to you?
I recommend pruning both of them at about the same time in the late winter after their winter chill requirement is satisfied.
Okay.
The thing about late pruning is if you prune them late, especially the muscadine varieties, they will bleed, or any of them will bleed a lot. And a lot of folks think that they're doing damage. That really hurts them, but the bleeding and the losing of the sap does not hurt them at all. Okay. So just because it's getting late, don't stop pruning. Go ahead and prune, and you won't hurt the plant.
Now, I know he tip pruned them after they flowered, and sometimes he'd get additional flowers on the muscadines that we had. So he had an extended crop. Now, I'd never seen that done before or since. Now, I don't know if that was a little trick he knew or...
Probably. Bill knows lots of tricks. He knows lots of tricks.
He knows the tricks.
That's something that the folks in the commercial industry don't have the luxury to do when they've got acres and acres of them. But on the muscadine types, and I'm going to go down on what we've got about 10 here. Hunt is a female variety.
Okay.
It's a black muscadine. Scuppernong, as we've already mentioned, a large bronze female variety. Carlos is a perfect flowered variety, also bronze. Pride and Higgins are two female varieties. Pride is a black muscadine. Higgins is a bronze. Golden Isle and Triumph, they're both perfect varieties and are both bronze. And then Magnolia and Cowart are both perfect flowered varieties. Magnolia is a bronze muscadine and Cowart is a black muscadine. Those are examples of muscadines that do well in this area. Okay. They are more disease resistant than peaches, plums, and nectarines. However, there are a couple of diseases that can create problems. And you probably will, to be successful in growing muscadines, will need to have them under a disease control program. Bitter rot is a disease that affects the fruit and causes them to swivel up and turn black. And then there's black rot, which affects the fruit and the leaves, are a couple of the diseases that can create a problem other than Pierce's disease, which all the muscadines have a natural resistance to Pierce's disease. The bunch grapes that we've talked about, those resistant varieties are varieties that have been bred for that and been kind of engineered and selected for their resistance.
But all in all, they're pretty easy to grow.
Pretty easy to grow. There's a few insects that can create problems. Probably the most devastating is a grape root borer, and that's one that you'll need to treat around the base of the plant with an insecticide. Chlorpyrifos used to be the one recommended. I'm not sure you can still get that, Lorsban or Dursban. I think it's available on a generic basis, but that's one that works well for grape root borer. But not a lot of insects that generally bother it during the growing season. But they're, muscadines have seeds. They're not seedless.
Thicker skin too, aren't they?
There's nothing like standing around and eating them in the yard and spitting the seeds out. Better than in the house.
Yeah, I guess so.
All right. Well, thanks for the information, Mike. We appreciate that. All right. Here's our Q&A session. And Rick, you can jump in there with us.
All right.
So feel free.
Okay.
All right. Here's our first question. My elm trees are dropping leaves like crazy. There are dark spots all over the leaves. Mr. D, what could that be? What are you thinking?
It's a leaf spot disease, I would say.
I would agree.
Yeah.
What is it? Elm black spot?
Elm black spot is what it is.
Probably aggravated by the wet weather that we had this year. We had this has been the wettest summer that I can remember.
Yeah.
In most of the areas of West Tennessee and Western Kentucky areas that I frequent. Yeah. I know that down here in Memphis, we've been a little bit drier in a couple of cases. We run our irrigation system 3 times out at AgriCenter International, twice, in July, and then we didn't run it anymore until this past week.
Wow.
So, but that wet weather aggravates the situation. There are, let's see, I've got a fungicide that I can mention, but I mean, an elm tree, you can't spray it unless it's a small specimen.
I'm about to say, if it's a tall tree, it's going to be very difficult.
And I've never seen this actually kill a tree.
I would think another season could be totally different.
Yeah. Next year will be different.
Nature may take care of it on some.
Yeah, the tree can tolerate it, and this time of the year, I mean, the leaves are going to fall anyway.
Another month, yeah.
Yeah, so you just get those leaves up. They might have spores.
Try not to reinfest it. Yeah.
But other than that, I think it'd be fine. Okay, so there's your elm trees. Okay, here's our next question. My zinnias have a white substance on the upper leaf surface. What could that be?
Powdery mildew.
It's powdery mildew. And we've gotten this question a few times this year. Here again is back to what Mr. D was saying. All of the wet weather, mild summer. So
I'd say it's too late to do anything about it when you have it. Yeah.
Right. The fungicides we have are primarily preventative in nature.
Yeah.
And unless you had, and the way to prevent them is I have a list of fungicides that you could go and in weather in summers like we had this year, it would have been a good idea to probably follow these disease preventative measures. However,
how would you know that it was going to be that way?
You can't see the future, and if you spray a fungicide and the rain washes it off, then you're no longer protected in a lot of cases.
And in the case of zinnias, which grow very quickly from seed, if you're growing them for cut flowers, I would just plant succession plantings like you would green beans or anything else. You could do 4 or 5 plantings and kind of stay ahead of it and destroy the older ones as the new ones come on.
Okay.
Mix it up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, tell me this. So how do you care for your powdery mildew at the garden?
Well, we do some preventative spraying.
Okay.
If it's crops we know are going to be susceptible. But generally, of course, we mulch everything, and that helps a great deal because you don't have the spores splashing up.
Okay. You have some.
Yeah, you want me to list them?
Hey, you can name a few.
Yeah, we've got, it's the very similar ones that I usually mention. Azoxystrobin, Chrysoxamethyl, Myclobutanil, Piperolin, thiophanate methyl, tridimethaphon, and trifloxystrobin, and triflumazole. All of those are varieties. Those are the active ingredients in the fungicides that do the trick, and we'll put those up a little bit later too.
Yeah, you say them fast enough, they sound good, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
and you know whether or not I mispronounced them or not. Most people don't know.
Probably knows that.
Sounds like a foreign language to everybody else.
All right, here's our third question. What are these dark purplish spots on the leaves of my dogwood? Here again, these questions all have something in common. It has to do with the weather, for the most part. So what do you think those dark purplish spots are?
It's probably septoria, septoria leaf spot. And there's also dogwood, not anthracnose, but there's anthracnose out there that also puts spots on dogwood leaves this year. So they've had a tough time.
Although the mildew, for some reason, on the ones I've seen, didn't seem as bad as some years on some of the dogwoods anyway.
Oh, the mildew, okay.
Yeah. It's hard to know. Been a wet year.
It's been a wet year. So
actually. We're seeing some disease pressure, but we're not seeing as much as I expected us to see.
Because the plants aren't distressed from drought.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
right.
yeah.
So, it's a trade-off.
Yeah, you're right.
How about that? So y'all have dogwoods at the garden too. They're relatively
the Cousas and the Cousa hybrids, the Cousas that are crossed with the American dogwoods, seem to be more resistant than the straight American dogwoods. And I hate to promote plants that aren't native, but it seems like the Cousas and the Cousa hybrids establish easier and have more disease resistance than our American dogwoods. So that's one of the cases where the native plant probably isn't as good in an altered landscape. It's okay in its native setting. I'm not saying don't plant them,
sure.
But it seems like the other ones are more resistant.
Sure, how about that? So I guess the same thing we could apply, with the zinnias, if we mulch, mulch around our trees.
Right, it'll help some.
It'll help.
And try not to overhead water. Always if you have irrigation, a low spray head or a low pattern is much better than getting the foliage wet, particularly when we're having hot, humid weather and late in the day where the foliage will stay wet overnight.
And drip systems.
Drip's excellent.
Yeah, and practice good sanitation. Again, pick those leaves up.
Yeah, if it's diseased, get rid of it.
Yeah, get rid of it. As Mr. D would say, double bag it and
double bag
noxious waste.
Get rid of it.
Yeah.
How about that? Okay, we have time for one more question. Here again, there's a theme here. My maple leaves are covered with some sort of disease. What could it be? So what are you thinking there?
Probably anthracnose, probably. There are several leaf spot diseases out there. We don't have a picture of it, do we?
Yeah, we don't have a picture of it. It always makes
probably, I've seen some of that out there.
Leaf gall sometimes in maples too.
Yeah, yeah. And there's that tar spot, but I hadn't seen too much of that this year.
Yeah.
But yeah, it could be any of the leaf spot diseases. But here again, it's pretty much the same thing that we've been talking about.
I think so.
Fungicides, preventative. You can spray some of those, and they're probably some of the same ones you mentioned before.
They are some of the same ones. A few extras: azoxystrobin, chlorthalonil, mancozeb, myclobutanil, propiconazole, thiophanate methyl, and trifloxystrobin. Some of those are the same. Some of them are a little different. Just check the label. But again, unless you have an air blast sprayer and you're in
really
commercial pecan business,
trees.
There's not a lot that you can do about it with a large tree.
Right.
Small specimens, small ones you can do a little bit about.
If you see repeat year after year in the same tree, then I'd contact a tree service and see if they can do a maintenance program for you to stay ahead of it.
Or remove the tree.
That's another option. Start with something cleaner and better. There's always better. Making the right choice of plants in the first decision, but we don't always know that we've made a bad choice till we see the disease.
That's right.
So always remember that that triangle, the disease
three-legged stool.
Take host and environment and pathogen. And if you take the host out, you solve that problem.
Well, I always tell people too, I want a dogwood, but I only have a sunny yard. It's like, just because you want it doesn't mean you have the right spot for it,
Wow, how about that? So for the larger tree specimens out at the garden, do you have somebody that comes in, certified arborist maybe, to do
Well, we have a
spraying?
certified arborist on staff now, but yes, believe it or not.
Wow, okay.
But we also do contact tree services for some of the bigger problems, that we can't handle ourselves.
All right. Well, the garden is doing pretty good.
We're doing all right. We're doing all right.
All right. Well, thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. That's all we have time for today. Don't forget, you can send a letter or an email with your gardening questions. The mailing address is on the screen, and the email address is familyplot@wkno.org. I'm Chris Cooper. Thanks for watching, and be sure to join us next time for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Be safe.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by Good Winds Landscape and Garden Center in Germantown since 1943 and continuing to offer its plants for successful gardening with 7 greenhouses and 3 acres of plants, plus comprehensive landscape services. International Paper Foundation, the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.